join the webinar. And as the session is being recorded, in case that you do not wish to have your image shared, kindly also close your camera recording. And also to note that you can use the chat as communication. I would also ask everybody to perhaps say some welcoming words in the chat, share where you're joining us from. And we will also have the Q&A session. You can also post your questions already during the webinar itself, or subsequently during the Q&A session. You will also have a chance, you can raise your hand and present your question in person. All the recording and slides will be available after the session on the CINTRAN EU website. So today we are with you, myself, so I'm the moderator of this webinar. My name is Tomasz Cygut, and I work at ICLE as a sustainable energy systems expert. And I'm joined by Jennifer Kott, who's also my colleague on the events and projects communication, providing support during this webinar. We are joined by two esteemed speakers. So we have Yanis Botel from the Wuppertal Institute. He is the researcher on future energy and industry systems and works as part of the International Energy Transitions Research Team. We're also joined by Karsten Elsner, also from Wuppertal Institute, who works as the researcher on energy transport and climate policy and works as part of the Global Climate Governance Research Unit. Perhaps to briefly recap on the CINTRAN project itself. So the focus of the CINTRAN project, I would, maybe once again, just ask all the participants to please mute yourself on arrival. Sometimes there's background noises. So to recap on the CINTRAN project, the focus of the CINTRAN project is the challenges of the transition and the structural changes required in the regions and transitions. The regions that are the focus point are regions that are either dependent on fossil fuel extractions or they have energy intensive industries present. The key focus areas are the Readiness mining area in Germany, the region of Silesia in Poland, the region of Western Macedonia in Greece, and Ida-Virumaa in Estonia. So we are focused on three topics within the project. So the pace of the energy transformation, the capacity of the regions to cope with the transition, and the pathways on the adaptation methods as part of the transition process. On our website, you can find several resources that might be of use to you. We have a page on findings. We have a page on publications. Currently, we also have tools that are available to you. And as part of our resources, we're currently counting. We have 196 publications and counting. These are actively uploaded as they come out. So you're also welcome to explore our website and look at the resources available to you. Also to recap on the CINTRAN event series, so we have the webinar series, which is now, this one is 8 in the line of 10 in total. So far we have had webinars on last year's impact on the war in Europe, in Ukraine, and its effects on the coal plus phase out. We also had a webinar on the empowering youth engagement. We had one on TJTPs, territorial just transition plans, socioeconomic resilience, also on especially focused on the communities and engaging governments for a just transition. We had one that was focused specifically on the role of women in particular in the carbon intensive regions. And the last one, which took place in July, was focused on energy communities and the role energy communities play in a just transition. Now, without further ado, I would like to pass the word to Yanis to present us the Just Transition Readiness Evaluation tool, which has just been produced, and let's hear what they have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tomasz, for the introduction, and welcome to everyone joining this webinar. I'm very happy that we now finally have published this tool that we've been working on for the last year. Let me start maybe with the ideas that are behind the tool, why we have developed it, and why we think it's necessary to take this rather a little bit more complicated approach to just transition implementation. If you have already skipped and read through the document, you will probably see that it's not super easy to understand its complexity and getting through the different levels. Yeah, I would still start with why have we developed this tool? So basically, we see both a theoretical problem and a practical problem at the moment when we talk about just transition. The first one is that there is no collectively agreed definition of just transition. So from different stakeholders, we have various ideas and conceptualizations of what just transition means. And with this tool, we add another one. We throw in another conceptualization into the game, so to say. But we experienced that, and from a research perspective, see that there are a differentiating mostly on the way on how they see justice and how extensive they are on their environmental dimension. And this is still like an open field. So when people say this is just transition and this is not, this is a normative interpretation, but it's still open on where exactly it goes. But I think it is very important that region themselves reflect on what kind of definition they want to adopt to their own region, and not just say we are doing just transition, but actually not without really making sure where to go exactly, because this really makes a big difference on what kind of policies you need to implement on the local level and which not. And that goes to the practical problem that we see. So when we talk about just transition, in the past, mostly it has been about a little bit about strategy development, about worker compensation, what kind of jobs need to be replaced, how can fairness be ensured for the people who are directly affected by the process. But if this discussion continues, then you often also talk about other things. You talk about how does the region can improve the livelihood for its people, what is happening otherwise, and also, and this is a very important point that I think in most discussions always also come up, is about the existing injustices that are currently that people see in the region themselves, that are not directly related necessarily to the transition needs, but who are also problems that need to be addressed. And I think this is a point that so far is not that much addressed by just transition talks and implementation strategies. So this is why we have developed this tool, to give an idea about how you could advance on taking just transition in a little bit broader scale. We call this a whole systems perspective on just transition. And how this is done in our tool, I will show you next. This is another slide on what we see as the whole systems perspective. I don't want to go into detail here, but basically, if you analyze different concepts of just transition, you can, this was done by the Just Transition Research Collaborative from the UN. They did very nicely, trying to put different definitions and concepts, and also how it has been used in practice so far, on a scale. And they say it kind of ranges between how much transformation do you want to actually pursue. And it ranges from what they call a status quo transition, that rather only want to change very little things, to a very transformational approach that says no, we need to also tackle the existing systemic levers that are kind of also a reason for why we have certain injustices and path dependencies at the moment. So our tool aims a little bit more at this like upper level. We don't want to like make a total like point it down. But it's like kind of between like a structural reform and a transformational approach. But we also say like every region need to understand which way, where they want to go exactly. And also this is not like, we don't want to tell regions where you go, but rather just give you a perspective of what is possible in that regard. So with that, I will go present you the tool. Now we have here, this is the theoretical framework of the tool, and we put it into, we called it this internally the like a fortune wheel, because it looks a little bit like you can like turn it around and see, and we basically structure it from the middle to the outside. So this is how you can read it. And it goes from this very core basic principles towards like goals, and then really the policy fields that we think are relevant. And a few more words on the different levels now. So at the core, we say what are actually the elements from just transition. So there we see on the one hand side, we have justice, the justice principles and the justice perspectives. Then we, of course, have the environmental principles that we frame in this tool as with the planetary boundaries concept. So this is where we say, like, if there are planetary boundaries, there's this like very well understood now. There also just recently new reports saying on which dimensions of these planetary boundaries are currently already at risk of like overflowing. But also, and this is very important also for just transition, that we say it is not only about where you want to go, but it is also about the how. And so this is also a lot about governance and transition governance itself, like how much does the political system also need to adapt to make these changes happening. So these are the core elements of our tool, and then we subsequently like add the other levels on top, and you can like more on this you can read in the tool itself. But just to say, like the justice dimensions, this is what we want to achieve on the social side of the transitions. The environmental dimension would be then how to stay within the planetary boundaries, and the governance dimension on how we can enable these changes. And then going one step further, we are adding another layer, and now we come to goals. And this is, now my animation has a flaw, but this is how it should look like. So from these principles, we said, okay, now we need to see like where we want to go. And so we add, we define some goals, and these goals, we haven't taken them like just out of our mind, what we thought is relevant, but we have used different concepts that are already out there. So for example, of course, we refer to the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, the ILO guidelines, but also as this tool is mostly focusing on EU regions, we also looked into the EU climate goals and the EU pillar of social rights as the main existing tools that go a little bit into that direction. And we actually, in the annex, we have a table where we say for each of the goals that we have defined, we took a look at the, or we took a look into these documents, and then you can see like which belongs to which one, if you are interested, how we defined these goals. And from these goals, then we have developed a working definition of just transition. And of course, this is what I have told you earlier about the about the inconsistencies of just transition concepts. So this is really to be understood as a working definition that we think makes sense. But of course, it can also be that you come to a different conclusion that makes more sense from your perspective. I think a difference to many other definitions that I have seen so far is that we really make explicit also this the governance part. So what you see here in yellow, yeah, that we also specifically include in our definition what actors and institutions need to do in order to make these changes on the social and environmental pillars. And then, as the next level, we define transition levers, and these levers they should show like which are, if you have developed these goals and say like this is where we want to go, but then we check on like, okay, but then which are the areas of action, so to say, where you need to then make changes happening. And this goes to like very obvious ones like energy system, of course, as one of the main parts in the environmental pillar. Transport systems need to change in industry. Also on the employment side, skills is often mentioned in regards to just transition. But here we also say, if we, for example, because we have defined in our goals, we also have defined health and human well-being as one of the goals of just transition. So in order to reach that, probably employment and some skills development will not be enough. So we also say here we need to include like things like quality of life or quality social protection measures that need to be addressed for a just transition. And there, of course, on a local and regional perspective, this becomes a little bit more tricky because then this is something that often the national governments decide. But we had lots of debates about this, like how much are we going very holistic here? But in the end, we said, like, no, if you want to set up a framework that really gives an overview about what is important for just transition, irrespective of which level needs to address this, we said, like, no, we need to make it explicit because it's important to just have on the radar, even if you probably not tackle it on your level. It is still important to know that someone needs to address it, because otherwise you will probably miss out on certain aspects of just transition implementation. And from this on, now we have to zoom out a little bit because the space is not enough. And from this level, now we reach to the core part of the tool, which is then this policy areas that you can see like in the outer ring. And these are really always asking about the policy. So now we are on a policy level. We have seen like the levers and all the areas where we think like some action needs to be done. And from this, we went one step further and said, okay, but then what are the policies on a local and regional level that need to be or that can be put in place to support the implementation of just transition in regards to, for example, employment, in regards to strategy and planning, in regards to buildings or transportation. These just as an example. And then what you can see like on the very outside is probably very small right now. But there we just added one more thing that I think is also very, very important, is about transition coherence. Because when you see like all these policy fields that are probably relevant, you will also realize that they're often probably interfering with each other. And if you just add up like, if you introduce local policies on one aspect and then on another aspect, coordination and coordination aspects play a much larger role than if you have a relatively close definition of just transition and understand it more as a for example, like more going only into economic diversification or finding jobs for people who have formerly worked in mining. So with that, and now you can see like it's a very yeah, like holistic tool with a lot of different levels. And so I can just only give you some examples of how we then took it up. So for every of the policy areas that you can see in the outer ring, we have 2 pages in the following part, and it always for all these questions, for example, here it is about cultural infrastructure in a region. We explain like why is it needed, making the links to the principles of just transition, and then also saying like what is needed more broadly in terms of implementing this, and then most importantly also how can it be addressed on a local level. And there we also explain it a little bit more in a broad sense, but also give examples of how this has been done in the past in some core regions in Europe. Unfortunately, sometimes we didn't find a good example yet, but then we try to at least give some further information and further reading part that may be helpful to to think about what can be done to implement that. And one more thing I want to show you is also that how you can navigate the tool. So if you're looking for a specific policy, then you can also, we have in between, we always have like, we have like kind of sliced out parts of this wheel. And then you can always just click on the part and the policy that you are interested in. And you can use the navigation elements on the top to always come back to these overviews if you're lost in a document. So that to say on what the tool can do and what the tool looks like. And so, and from our perspective, now of course the question is what can you do with it? And from our perspective, there are 4 main things that you might be helpful when you do this. And the first thing would be you can kind of, if you look into your local policies, and also probably on the regional and national one, if you want to have a complete overview, you can actually see how complete is a just transition planning going and which areas are addressed at the moment and which parts are overlooked. This, of course, will probably need some additional efforts. This might be complicated, but I think for the future, and this is also for us as researchers, something that we are interested in is like how this could look like if you do like a case study on a regional local level and really try to dig into the details to then get just the first impression of where are we standing. And it also, in that regard, gives you then an overview about which are actually the areas, the policy areas that your municipality or the region have a mandate to make changes. So what are the levers that you can decide on your own, and for which ones you need to talk to the upper levels to say like, oh, we need to have new policies here, or like need more coordination in regards to address a certain aspect. And then it would be also about instruments for steering the transition. So as we also try to give you some examples, there are also then, like, of course, policy instruments where we say this could be a way of how you can address a certain issue. And and for example, what we have seen often is that spatial planning is a very, very powerful policy instrument that can make that you can use for multiple of the policy areas that we have described in our tool. And then the last one would be also then about the priorities. So where to get started is often the question that comes up in the regions. And if you, of course, like we don't want to say, like, actually, from our perspective, everything is important. But of course, you need to start somewhere. And maybe if you take a look at the tool and make this analysis for your region, then you can see like which areas are actually like the most pressing ones, or where do we have authority, and it is quite important. And then you can make a little bit of a prioritization of which are the action points and the levers that you want to concentrate on in the beginning. Well, these were, of course, these were our ideas, what can be done with the tool, and I'm very much interested in in your ideas and what you think could be done with this, and where are also the challenges and the complicated parts. But before we go into discussion, I want to hand the floor to my colleague Carsten Elsner. He's one of the co-authors of the tool, and he will tell you a little bit about the scoping case studies that we have performed while we developed this tool.
Yes, thank you, Jannis, and also welcome from my side. So as Jannis already mentioned, I will now dive into the 2 case studies that we identified to basically apply the tool to. And we decided to look at the Rhinish coal region, but also at the case of Estonia and the region of Ida-Viru, and the carbon-intensive case of the oil shale industry here. We chose those regions first because we have already a lot of information gathered in the project, but also because there are different legislative setups here. So in Germany, we have a federal state system. There is the national state, there is the federal state North Rhine-Westphalia. There are the counties and also the municipalities, and they all are responsible for certain aspects of the transition. And in Estonia, we have basically a centralized system. So there's only the nation state, the county, and the municipality. So next slide, please. Yes, perfect. So now I come to the case of Estonia and the just transition attempts here. So as I mentioned, we have the oil shale industry, and it's basically the primary source for Estonia's greenhouse gas emissions. It also accounts for 84% of Estonia's electricity production. It's also a very large contributor to the GDP of Ida-Viru, and so the economy is not very well diversified apart from the oil shale industry. The industry is also a very large employer in the region, and there are environmental and health issues associated with the industry. We also have kind of difficult circumstances here due to various reasons. So first, there is an aging and declining population. There is, compared to the other parts of Estonia, relatively high unemployment and low income. And we also have problems of center periphery, which, first is the case here that in the center we have an Estonian-speaking majority in the country, but also in the region of Ida-Viru, there is the large Russian-speaking minority. And also in the case of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the war, the tensions rose, and now we also have the issue of energy security, which further kind of is a problem for the transition. And in terms of the transition, there is the so-called territorial just transition plan for the region of Ida-Viru. And the main challenge here that was identified is to diversify the economy and create new value-added jobs. The EU Just Transition Fund supports this with 350 million. And there's an investment plan, basically to diversify the economy. For example, one project here is the setup of a new magnet factory in the region. yeah, there's also the line of action, which are, or lines of action, which are basically identified in the TJTP. So economy and workforce, but also environmental and social inclusion. And in terms of the tool, we basically assessed that the TJTP touches on many transition levels, but yeah, especially the building sector and the transportation and mobility are not sufficiently addressed here. And yeah, basically there are overall limited funds for the transition. So it's not only in the tool, also it's not only about touching on each lever, but also about the quality of each policy and also about the intensity of the funding. And now next slide, please. Yeah, now we have the, we compared this with the case study in Germany and the Rhinish lignite mining region. Yeah, in comparison here, the GDP, the contribution to the GDP in the region is only very small. There are less than 10,000 people directly employed, but still in the region there are many energy intensive industries, and they are also affected by the transition because they basically yeah, rely on the electricity produced from the power plants. But in comparison to Idaviro, the Rhinish region has a very diversified economy, and the demography is also kind of stable with a tendency towards urbanization. In terms of the just transition, there is a coal phase out planned in 2030, and 14 billion are allocated over 20 years to the region. And yeah, as you see, this is already yeah, a huge difference to the region of Idaviro because the sum is just much larger here. And in Germany in total, we have 40 billion, which are basically allocated for the just transition. The main responsibility of the transition lies with the state government of North Rhine-Westphalia, but there's also a body which was set up called Zukunftsagentur Rheinisches Revier. And this body basically functions as an intermediary platform between the region and the state level. There are 9 thematic areas which are eligible for funding. And yeah, in the application of the tool, we found that most transition levers are targeted, but there is a strong focus on job creation and retraining. And we also found that human well-being levers and welfare are kind of less in the center of the attention. And the argument is here that, or the national state government basically argues here that this is the responsibility of the national government, and the welfare state is already well established. But we still would argue that more integration and more coordination between all the levels would be very good in this case. Yes, and also to point out that this was only a very brief introduction to both regions, and we have a publication on this, and if you want to have more information, please check this publication. And with this, I hand over to Yannis again.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carsten, for that addition from our scoping case studies. So there, like one more addition, maybe we have planned in the beginning, we have planned to actually make 2 full case studies about the regions, what I've told you earlier about like a full assessment of all policies that play a part, to really get an overview about which areas are addressed and which not. But we soon, unfortunately, found that this would go way beyond our capacities within this project. So we kind of had to rather dive very, like get a first, like we basically only wanted to check if the tool would work for two very different regions, and what can we learn from like a first look in onto these levels. But basically a deeper look into an analysis on the regional level, this would be a project in itself potentially. Yeah, but this is something that I think makes a lot of sense for many regions, to also to define like how much well are you already on the way towards a just transition. And this is a follow-up question that often comes also now with the TGTPs and the just transition mechanism planning on how to assess just transition. But from my point of view, it often only touches upon like how much it assess the implementation of the just transition mechanism, but not necessarily like just transition itself as a more holistic concept. And from, especially if you take it from a whole systems perspective, like we did with this tool. So we wanted to give you a little bit another idea of how you can frame just transition with that. We think if you would implement it like we did it, or like how we conceptualize this in our tool, I think you would get closer to what people think a just transition is in the end than it is often done currently in many regions. And with that, I hand over to Thomas. I think, yeah, we talked already 40 minutes now, so I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Yanis, and thank you, Karsten, as well, for the wonderful presentation on the tool itself, and also presenting these two practical examples from Ida Viruma and from Germany, from the Rhenish region. For us, this is very insightful already to see how the structure is set up. However, I would now like to open the floor also to the audience. I think today with us here, we have a lot of practitioners from the regions. And I think, especially for you, this is something that is intended for you to be applicable. So we would like to hear from you. What are your first impressions? Do you see it as applicable? And we actually have also, I think, amongst the audience already two persons that we have interacted with in the past and who have already used the tool to some extent. We have Konstantina from Western Macedonia in Greece, and we also have Balázs Hegi from Northern Hungary. So I would maybe first ask Konstantina Togaridou if you could maybe join us and say a few words about your impressions and how do you see this tool coming into play in Western Macedonia. Thank you.
Okay, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you perfectly.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for this very useful tool from my side. I had the honor to be a just transitional bureau expert in a just transitional bureau exchange between Western Macedonia and Gotland in Sweden. And actually, before the second workshop that took place 2 days ago on the 4th of December, I have seen that you have launched this tool about evaluation tools for just transition. And it has been very useful for me as I managed to take, let's say, a section of this tool that it has been related with transition and good governance principles. And I have just suggested it to the Catalan authorities, and they thought that it is a very interesting one because it is for the first time that we have got, let's say, a tool that it presents a holistic approach to the just transition. And let me explain myself a little bit what I actually mean. That taking as an example the Gotland region, there they have got already a government system that it is a little bit different compared to other just transition areas. And with this tool and with this government principles that I have mentioned to them, they will use this tool as a comparative tool to make an analysis of what should be developed further to their government instruction in order to implement in the best way just transition plan. And I think that it will be very helpful for all the experts that are involved in the just transition process. And I really appreciate the fact that we have show us a way how to make all this effort easier, not only for us as an expert, but also to the just transition as areas as well.
Thank you, Konstantina, for your feedback. Yeah, good to hear about these examples, and good to hear also how you already see the applicability. Do you maybe already have some questions also for Yanis and Karsten at this point? Something maybe because today we have here with us the people who have actually developed the tool. So if you have any questions that are perhaps more technical or practical, this is the opportunity also for us to get these answers. We cannot hear you.
Okay, I think that now I think that you can hear me. Yes, I think that we are in the very beginning, and I think that many questions maybe and problems will arise as the process goes on. But I wouldn't like to concentrate right now on the possible or the future problems that may arise. The main point is that right now we have got a tool that it can be used in the just transition areas, and for the planning and for the implementation as well, because we have got here the chance to see if all the just transition plans that have already been approved, if they are on the right track. But besides that, we can also see what developments on what modifications can be done in order to have the desirable result. So in my opinion, of course, in the future, after I would say I can right now specify the timeline, but I guess that in the future we'll have got some questions definitely about the application of this instrument. And I think that the beginning has been a very promising one. And from the acceptance of the authorities that have suggested it, I think they found it very interesting and very useful for them. And we try to see in the specific case study in contrast how they have used this tool for their own region. That is not a coal region one. This is something that we have also stressed, that we're talking about energy transition general. And this is a tool that can be used not only for coal regions, but also for other regions as well. And this is something that has been missing in our, let's say, effort and in our expertise in order how to be more supportive to the areas that they are facing and impending problems, depending on their effort towards the sustainable future.
Thank you, Konstantina. I really like the point that you flagged, that the energy transition basically is a topic that concerns all the regions, not just coal-intensive regions. And so in that sense, the tool can be applicable everywhere, basically, and for all practitioners. Yeah, I appreciate your insights. I would maybe also pass the word to another practitioner who's with us today, Balázs Hegyi from Northern Hungary. Maybe also from your side, Balázs, what are your impressions with the tool? Do you also have an impression? Konstantina mentioned that it's basically a tool that can be used in many ways. So not just for in the preparation phase, but also the tracking phase, the implementation, the preparation of projects. So it's something that goes across the entire work mode. Do you also have this impression that the tool can be utilized in many different ways?
Yeah, of course. And okay, so hello everyone, I'm Balázs Hegyi, and as you mentioned, I'm from the Northern Hungarian core region, and I represent the Coal Commission Secretariat as an environmental expert. So first of all, I also would like to thank you for this toolkit and the presentation. I think it's will be a very helpful and useful tool for the core region. And I think maybe it can be also useful for any other transforming region, for example, in the industry. As Konstantin mentioned, this toolkit can be used many ways, and maybe I have another way to use, because our institute is a part of a university. So maybe we can use this tool for research purposes in the future. For example, we are planning a research to compare the just transition of different countries on the basis of some objective methods, and maybe this tool can be a great help for this. And we are also working closely with the Hungarian Ministry of Energy. So if we do the analysis for Hungary, or in the case of Hungary, we can make recommendations on what changes are needed at the policy level. For example, we can define the dimension of just transition where we are underperforming, and we can suggest some solution for that. Maybe I will have a lot of questions if I start to use this tool, but one thing came to my mind that this point at this point of the implementation of just transition, we have really practical problems. For example, we all deal with the loss of interest caused by the long process, and the uncertainty, because maybe you know that in Hungary there are still no call for proposals from the Just Transition Fund, and we also deal with the problem of the dimension of planning, because local stakeholders fear that the fund will spread through the counties and not concentrated in the area really affected by the transition, because in Hungary the planning was basically in county level, but in fact the closure of the mines and the transformation of the power plant affects a much smaller area in both Heves and Borsod Zemplén counties, and maybe the this systematic or this holistic approach can solve this problem, but how do you see that? How can this tool help these really technical, really small problems?
Yeah, I may answer directly. I think the scope of this tool is not really on the detailed level, unfortunately. I mean, this would be the follow-up that you also then, for every policy area that we have defined in the outer ring, would be then also like set up some kind of guidance of how you can assess if the policy works or not, and what needs to be done to implement the policy for each aspect. But unfortunately, this goes beyond what the tool can provide. I think it is really more about this, more like if you take a little bit like a meta level and say, like, where do we want to go in the just transition? And if we want to really start a strategy process or something like this, what are the areas that we need to take into account, and how to make sure that we're not missing out on certain aspects? I think this is something that the tool can really deliver on. Yeah, but also this is why we call it Readiness tool, because it's not about it's unfortunately not yet about the measurement of specific policies, how good they are, how well they function. This is also very necessary. Yeah, but this needs to be done in the future.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Balázs. Any other questions from your side, or otherwise I would also open the Q&A to the broader audience. Yeah, any other questions from your side, Balázs?
No. I will have a lot of questions, but first I have to start to use the tool.
Yes, indeed. In that case, I would also open up the Q&A to the broader audience. So if anybody has already some questions, you're also free to access the tool online and check how in practice it works, like going from the first ring to the last ring. So through the details, maybe you have some questions related to your scope of work. Otherwise, I would also raise one question specific to Yanis and Karsten. You have mentioned the tool is designed to be a holistic approach, and it takes into account all these different dimensions and different goals, from the environmental goals to like climate, to social goals. You mentioned quality of life, healthcare, well-being. What is the right approach? Which are the areas that you would say that the regions should perhaps prioritize? Is there like a framework, or would you say that in terms of the priorities, each region would have to tailor it? Is there a guidance on this, like how it would work then from each priority area or from each dimension, from each goal to goal? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Tomasz. I think this is something very specific in each region, and there needs to be we need like local local specifications. But of course, generally, it is like one core aspect on the environmental pillar, for example, is definitely like phasing out of fossil fuels and coal. Like it's hard to imagine that you can call it a just transition if you don't phase out of coal and really get rid of the biggest polluters. And this is, of course, like this is in this kind of regard, you can prioritize already to say like these are the areas where you can reduce emissions the most, but also on the social side, like what are the like most pressuring topics in the region. And this is why or like this, there you can use the like the our injustice definition and like how you can frame that, like what is it perceived in the region as a priority in terms of justice. So what are the tackling problems there? And then you can see like which lever are probably best to address in the first place. But again, I would say in the end, it is really also about like taking this as a full framework and say we need to address everything at some point.
Thank you for that response. Yeah, this is also how I would understand it. So tailoring it per region, what's the most urgent, but also making sure that all different areas are being addressed. We also already have two questions in the chat and the Q&A. So I would maybe start with a question from Diana. To what extent do you think it could be used for stakeholder engagement to assess which aspects are most important to the citizens affected in the region?
Yeah, I think this is also something that you can use the tool for, then a little bit for prioritization here. We had a workshop earlier this year in summer in the Rhenish mining area where we also used the conceptualization of injustices, different forms of injustices, and then try to map what are the current problems in the region in regards to what are the problems now, what are the problems that you can see coming from the transition, and what are potential injustices in the future that you need to address as well. And I think this is something that you can also use when you are interacting with stakeholders and citizens to also trigger a little bit like what are their perspectives on the priorities.
Okay, thank you for that response. I see more questions popping up in the Q&A. So I think we just have time for this one more question from George. It seems to me that the tool is designed primarily to reanalyze and analyze and implement the already existing TJTPs. Would you agree? And he also notes that considering that there are several participants from non-EU countries, Would you foresee that this tool could also be utilized to helping to guide the development of new JT plans, so in areas that don't have existing TJTPs? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, George, for the question. This is also an interesting one, because we actually the idea behind the tool was also a little bit in response to the development of the TJTPs. I think, like, in general, it's like the just transition mechanism and how it's set up, it's really a helpful tool for the regions, but it really shifts the focus towards the implementation of the JTM and a little bit away from like the self-governed way of how to set up just transition strategies. And I think this is important to not lose that idea also. Even though now everyone's busy with implementing and of course wants to access the funds, they're very, very helpful and very important. But in the end, if you really think, and if you think from the citizens' perspective, what is their ideas, like what they would perceive, or what they would think is a just transition, then of course it's also something that should go beyond the TGTPs. So it's a way on how to reflect on, is the current development in the region going into the right direction? And for non-EU countries, it is the same. Here, I would say it's, of course, we developed that in mind with the EU governance system that is in place, and certain policies, especially on the social side. So in some countries, you probably would have like things like energy poverty way much more in the center than you would do for an EU region. But in general, and that I hope that it's also applicable in some way in the non-EU region.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive answer, Yanis. And with this, I think we are coming to the close of the time we had for this webinar. Before we close, I would just like to also alert all the participants. We already have some links that my colleague Jen posted in chat. So the next webinar in the Regions in Transition webinar series will be coming up next year, end of January. So please stay tuned for that. And we will also have the upcoming CINTRAN, third CINTRAN Academy event and the final conference of the CINTRAN project coming up in the first week of March next year. I would also like to thank you for your participation. And in case that some of you, if you missed part of this webinar, just note that also we will have a recording and slides available on our website. And also this will be also shareable, so you can share it with any potential colleagues in follow-up. And last but not least, I would like to thank especially Yanis and Karsten for their insights, for the presentations that they have given us today. And I would also like to thank Jennifer for all her support during the webinar. So thank you very much for this, and I wish you a good afternoon and also pleasant holidays ahead. Thank you.
Thank you too, and feel free to write me a message if you have any questions about the tool when you go into it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.